we are talking The Unnamable. This one directed by Jean-Paul Oulet, who adapted this from the story by H.P. Lovecraft. So this is a film that I remember seeing way back in the days of the VHS, seeing the videotape there with a cover, the scary image of the demon on the front, and think, oh my god, that looks really scary. And although I have seen this movie before in the past, I didn't really remember much about it. I just kind of rewatched it for this review. Now, the story is relatively slight. Basically, there is this old house which has a curse on it, where there is a creature, female demon or demonic-like creature, has been trapped in this house and has some kind of like incantation to stop it from escaping. And this takes place 100 or so years before our main story takes place. Cut to modern times, aka the late 80s in this point, and there is now a university a short distance from this old dilapidated house, and we get a variety of kids daring themselves to basically go in this house, hearing stories and such. Ultimately, once they get in there, they get magically locked in and have to deal with the creature at hand, and that's basically the story. So let's talk about, first of all, what works in this movie. This is the kind of like a typical example of like an 80s horror film. A little bit light on plot, lots of kind of gory effects, lots of stereotypical, well, now stereotypical kind of characters, and quite cool ass monster. What did I like about this movie? There are some very impressive practical effects, not just the creature itself, but when we see kind of wounds and stuff. There's a sequence, for example, where a character gets their throat torn out, and there are some very, very impressive kind of gore effects with blood sort of spurting out and stuff like that. It looks very, very good. And, you know, by today's standards, I don't think you would get any better, to be honest. The creature itself as well, it's quite a unique design, like a kind of like pale female-style demon, which is kind of like cloven-hoofed, and it's a little bit different, I think. I remember I always used to get this kind of mixed up with Pumpkinhead when I was a kid. But I got to say, I think it kind of it is somewhat kind of memorable in its own right. And I do always really remember that VHS cover and thinking, damn, the image on that one, which was just a photograph of the film, looks pretty scary. I think some of our characters are quite fun. They are somewhat over the top, admittedly, but nonetheless, they are quite enjoyable for some 80s cheeseball fun. And obviously, it has the kind of the Necronomicon, obviously links to a wider, you know, H.P. Lovecraft universe, as a lot of these kind of films have loose tie-ins with other kind of H.P. Lovecraft lore. And I think the actual house itself does look suitably creepy. Put a pin in that, because I do have a problem with some of the set here. Well, let's talk about what doesn't work. So let's just pick up what I've just said. Although I do think, on the surface, this kind of set looks quite creepy and very much like an old dilapidated house. It clearly looks like a set. In actual fact, when you see people try and open locked doors and try and kind of like rattle the door, you'll see the whole wall shake and things like this, where obviously it's just a flimsy set rather than kind of a solid wall, things like that. The plot is practically non-existent. It is just teens go into a house. Now, I haven't read the short story that this is based on, so I can't tell you how close this adaptation is. I would suggest it's maybe slimmed down somewhat, because there's very little plot here, to be quite honest with you. It really is just teens trapped in a house and there's a monster in there. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. The characters are a little goofy. They're kind of fun, and you do remember them because they're so over the top. But they are over the top. They are kind of cheesy, especially our Brainbox character, who is just so, you know, he's so over the top in regards to his intellectual stuffiness. It's just a caricature rather than a character itself. The actual creature itself, although I quite like the design of the kind of the makeup, I do still have a couple of issues with it. Ultimately, although the prosthetics look good on the kind of the head and the hands and stuff like that, she's just wearing a white bodysuit for the rest of the kind of the body, which kind of looks a little like a white bodysuit for the rest of it. And I've got to say, I think the actress who they got to kind of play the monster I don't know, overdoes it a little bit with kind of like, you know, creepy hand movements and things like this, where it's just like, it's a little bit on the nose, and that's the whole thing with this movie. It's just really kind of cheesy, and quite dopey, to be honest. There's nothing really to write home about in this movie. It's such a basic premise, with kind of relatively kind of stock characters and an okay kind of monster, but that's really it. I mean, it's just not a lot to this film. It's enjoyable for a complete time waster, but I don't really think this is a particularly good film in any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I would say it's a slightly below average film, if you want my honest opinion. There are worse films. I think it's like I've said, it's somewhat typical of kind of like a straight to DVD, or straight to video movies that you would get in the 80s. Just very kind of like unambitious, to be honest, in regards to pushing it in the envelopes back then. So I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. It's still fun to a point, but it's really nothing to write home about. Have you seen it? What did you think of the Unnamable? And have you seen Unnamable Part 2? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.